What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so I know I get this reputation from others that or I have this reputation that I'm a Isiah Thomas hater, you know. And the thing is, look, I think Isiah Thomas is a snake in how he moves in many ways, okay? I do think that behind the scenes, he did Adrian Dantley dirty. I think that he did, behind that nice guy exterior, I think that, you know what I'm saying, he molded the Pistons, the bad boy Pistons, to be what they were, which was a bunch of thugs, right? I do believe that there's a reason why him and Magic Johnson didn't speak for a while, okay? A long time, actually, because he was smiling in his face and then spreading terrible rumors about Magic Johnson behind his back, okay? That's snakish behavior. But, you know, at the end of the day, oh, and by the way, we also got to remember that he has been the most bitter guy in the world when it comes to Michael Jordan, right? I mean, these things are all facts. But at the same time, you cannot take away this guy's greatness as a basketball player, okay? And that's when you got to take your personal feelings out of things about how a person may be personally. And you have to acknowledge, you have to respect what this guy has contributed to the game as a player. I mean, to me, I think there's a lot of truth in the statement that if this guy was 4 or 5 inches taller, he could have been arguably the greatest player in the history of the NBA. I mean, to consider that this guy being only 6'1" in an era where you had giants playing, like 7'4" Mark Eaton, 7'7" Manute Bol, 7'4" Rick Smits, when you had all these giants playing, and 86, 87 is statistically still the tallest year in the history of the NBA. For the league to be dominated by a 6'1", 180-pound point guard is unbelievable. You know, and I don't want to, you know, go too long into a soliloquy about how great he is, but this guy could be a great one-on-one player. He could play one-on-one like Kyrie Irving. He could score like a Larry Bird, like a Michael Jordan if needed. He could pass the rock like a John Stockton. He could be a game and floor manager, the likes of Chris Paul. He could do those things. He was phenomenal. Don't just look at stats, ladies and gentlemen. You got to look at these games and watch what Isiah Thomas did, bro. He was unbelievable. But having said all of that, right, I believe the Pacers did him dirty. In particular, Larry Bird did him dirty by firing him in 2003. And more than just personal feelings here, I agree with Isiah Thomas when he said something to Larry Bird's face earlier this year. And that is that if he hadn't got fired, the malice in the palace would have never occurred. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. Now, let's get something out the way here. I know people are going to say, well, look, those 3 years he was coaching, the records weren't all that great. The first year under Isiah Thomas, they were 41-41. And then the second year, they were 42-40. Third year, 48-34. And each year, they got knocked out in the first round. Fine. But there's some things that need to be remembered here. Bird, when he was coaching the Pacers, all right, which was 1997 to 2000. When he was coaching the Pacers, it was a different squad. This was a team led by Reggie Miller, Rick Smits, Mark Jackson, the Davis boys, Derek McKee. Who else? Chris Muller was on the team at the end. Toward the end of that team, you had Sam Perkins. What I'm getting at is you had veterans. Okay? You had the veterans on that squad. And when Isiah Thomas took over, by the time he took over, you started seeing a changeover. You started seeing a team that was cultivating young talent. Okay? You had, and we all know that when you have young talent, you have growing pains. Just like the Boston Celtics right now. They're one of the best teams in the NBA, defending NBA champions. But when Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum were young, that nucleus, that duo and the nucleus around them, you saw the talent, you saw the potential, but they had growing pains, right? They had to go through that dirty road, right? Like Tom Petty would learn to fly, right? They had to do that. And anyway, when you look at those Pacers teams, you had a young Al Harrington, you had a young Jermaine O'Neal, you had ultimately a young Ron Artest. Who else was on those teams? Austin Crocier. I think wasn't Brad Miller there? I don't know how long he stayed, but you had Brad Miller. You had Jalen Rose, who was still relatively young, although I think he went to Chicago by 2002. But anyway, you had a young team, is what I'm getting at, right? With Reggie Miller still there. So while the record wasn't that great, Isiah Thomas was beloved by those Pacers players. They loved him because he was a great coach as far as instilling how to play the game. He was a great motivator. As many people put it, he put seasoning on them young players. And you saw the development. If you really watched those games, you saw the development. In particular, Jermaine O'Neal and Ron Artest. You saw the development because right before the Malice to Palace, people forget, Ron Artest was playing at a superstar level. He was playing at a superstar level that he never quite reached again in his NBA career, even when he won championships with the Lakers, even when he was clearly one of the best defenders with the Kings and the Rockets. Did he play the Rockets? Didn't he play the Rockets? I know he played with the Kings. They played the Rockets too. But when he was playing with those teams, he never quite reached the levels he was at before. And a lot of that had to do with Isiah Thomas. Now, I understand Rick Carlisle, who is the guy that Larry Bird fired. Rick Carlisle is the guy that Larry Bird hired when he fired Isiah Thomas in 2003. You know, Rick Carlisle, go back to the 1980s. He played with Larry Bird with the Boston Celtics, won championship in 1986. Rick Carlisle was this guy. Rick Carlisle was one of his assistant coaches when Larry Bird coached the Pacers from 97 to 2000. But as we see it now, Rick Carlisle's an overrated coach. I mean, what has Rick Carlisle done with the Pacers? Has Rick Carlisle helped to develop any young players that you can think of? Has he helped to develop, you know what I'm saying, help any way, shape, or form in the progression of Tyrese Halliburton? After Dirk got older, did he seem to, I mean, think about it. Those teams are horrible. He couldn't get along with Luka. Luka got him fired out of Dallas. You know what I'm saying? Unless Rick Carlisle is playing under a superstar, or has a superstar on his team, I should say, he's very ordinary as a coach. Whereas Isiah Thomas, he actually helped to develop players, man. If you really look at it, I think he was a really good coach. The NBA record doesn't always translate into how great a coach is. I've said this before. Bill Fitch, one of the great coaches in the history of the NBA. I don't know why he's not on the top 15 list. That just goes to show you that these people that are looking at these lists, they don't always understand what the fuck they're talking about. Bill Fitch was a top 10 all-time coach. Now all of a sudden he's missing on the top 15. Why? Because idiots are looking at the 1,000 losses. They're looking at the 46% win percentage, and they're saying, oh, well, he really wasn't that great. When in reality, Larry Bird said Bill Fitch was the greatest coach he ever had. Bill Fitch also was a guy who tried to go to bad teams and turn them around. So ultimately, when you're going to bad teams and trying to turn around horrible teams, you're going to lose a lot of games, especially initially. Bill Fitch is the guy that helped to lead the Cleveland Cavaliers turnaround in what was it, the mid to late 1970s. So, it's not always about wins and losses, not all the time. One thing, though, the Malice at the Palace would have never happened. The Malice at the Palace would have never, ever happened if Larry Bird didn't fire Isiah Thomas. That's a fact. And he told Larry Bird that to his face. The Detroit Pistons fans would have had way too much respect for Isiah Thomas to pull something like that. Way too much respect. And we all know that those of us who were there, that Pacers team was the best team in basketball prior to that horrible incident that occurred in November 2004. Now, you could argue, well, how do we know that everything would have happened the same if Isiah was a coach and blah, blah, blah? I actually say, well, look, if anything, they would have been better. Because all Rick Carlisle did was take the team that Isiah Thomas helped to cultivate and take them to another level. You could argue, I know it sounds ridiculous, you could argue that Rick Carlisle did to Isiah Thomas what Steve Kerr did to Mark Jackson. When Isiah Thomas fired, when Larry Bird fired Isiah Thomas in August of 2003, replaced him with Rick Carlisle. That's what I see. And I get it. He did his friend a solid, Rick Carlisle. Larry Bird did his friend Rick Carlisle a solid, who, by the way, didn't Rick Carlisle leave like 2 years later or something like that? So, it is what it is. But let's just say something, though. Let's look at this. If Isiah Thomas and the stay in the Malice Palace never happens, what happens with the 2004-05 Pacers team? Did they win a championship? We'll never know. Does Reggie Miller ride off into the sunset his last year in the NBA with a title? Once again, we'll never know. And one other thing I want to say, too, about those Pacers teams. When they did lose in the first rounds, they weren't losing to bad teams. In 2001, if I remember correctly, I think they lost in 6 to the Philadelphia 76ers, the same Sixers team that went ultimately to the NBA Finals in 2001. When they were knocked out in the first round in 2002, it was by the New Jersey Nets, that same Nets team led by Jason Kidd that ultimately went to the NBA Finals. And in 2003, they lost to, I believe it was the Boston Celtics, a team that had Paul Pierce, Antoine Walker. And that team didn't go to the NBA Finals. I do believe, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that team went to the Eastern Conference Finals. So they weren't losing to terrible teams in any way, shape, or form, So, yeah. I think the firing of Isiah Thomas changed the history of that Pacers organization, because to put more emphasis on this, I don't think the Malice at the Palace would have ever happened, because the Detroit fans would have had way too much respect for Isiah Thomas to do that to the Pacers and do that to his team for what he contributed to the city. And the last thing I want to point out, I don't think Isiah Thomas harassed that woman when he was a New York Knicks executive. I'm just using my common sense here. If anything, you know, people are all different. You know what I'm saying? Some people you can play around with, some people you can't. Some people, you know, are cool. Some people are arseholes. Some people are scammers, meaning that they'll look at opportunities to try to get a come up. I'm trying to figure out why her lawyer thinks she was awarded $11 million. Why she should have been awarded $10 or $11 million. Like I said before, I don't know what the details, and I wasn't there, but you know, I'm just having a hard time understanding what could have happened. You know what I'm saying? I'm thinking what happened is Isiah Thomas probably was harsh on her as far as her performance. And I think that she probably was looking for any little thing that he said that she could weaponize and use against him. That's kind of what I think, but I could be totally wrong. I maybe am wrong. But I don't think Isiah Thomas did what she accused him of. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, that was a precursor. That event, that accusation, that situation was a precursor to what we see today. The epidemic that we see today with black men being accused of every little thing. You know? But anyway, that's all I got to say on this one, man. Tell me what you guys think.